years ago in Africa, and I couldn't settle on that. And I went back to this list of 24 sermons that Brother Locke preached on, and they're standalone. These verses are standalone verses in the Bible that they need no other interpretation other than that verse interprets itself. Well, he included in that, and I saw this, I looked at it, and I went and looked further. Wasn't really wanting to settle on that one, and couldn't find the one I wanted, so I went back and I reread this one, and I thought, you know, the Lord he really laid it on my heart that this is the one that I need to do. And I hope, pray for me that I'm nervous. Pray for me that I can calm down and get my message out. There's a lot of things I want to say that aren't written down here if I can just remember. But this, if you'll go ahead and turn to Psalms 84:6, we'll look at the two verses prior to that first, before we read that. But, you know, this message has got a title. And I'm going to tell you the title, and I want you to remember it, okay? Because it's going to be significant at the end of this message. The title of this message is Leave a Well in the Valley. And again, I take no credit for this message. I have changed a few things and some comments that I have that are pertinent to me, that relate to me, that I put in here, that taken some out that he had that were relatable to his life and his experiences. But other than that, I've not changed anything that Brother Locke put in here. And well, I really appreciate his style. I've read a lot of his Sunday school material. We've used a lot of it. And so we're gonna start with this. And I debated whether to read the first two verses, 4 and 5 first, and I think I'll just read chapter 84, Psalms 84, verse 6 first. This is our standalone verse. And I want you to know, I want to know if you all have seen this before. I've read the Bible through several times. I don't remember this. I don't remember seeing it. So verse 6 says, who passing through the valley of Baca maketh a well. The rain also filleth the pools. Okay? Verse 4 then, let's go back up to verse 4. In verse 4, there's a song of the child of God. It says in verse 4, it says, blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will be still praising thee. There's a praising going on in his house. And, you know, also, and it's not in this chapter, and if you want to turn there, you can. I'm going to read Psalm 22, verse 3 says, but thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. In these verses, David is talking about Jesus and his suffering on the cross. And actually, when Jesus hung on the cross, he quoted Psalms 23:3. And it's about suffering. It's about the suffering that he went through on the cross. You might see where I'm going with this. But the strength of the child of God in verse 5 is not ours. It's not our strength. It's not our own. Look what it says in verse 5. It says, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee. David is talking to God. He's talking about God. Our strength is not in our own self. It is in God. So we see that verse 4 talks about our praising him, and verse 5 talks about the strength is in him. And it's not of our own. We can do some things alone. And we can do certain things with the help of others. But we can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth us. We can do all things through Christ. There is no need to go through anything alone. God is there. It isn't he telling you? He is there with you when you're going through something. And so there's no need to do things alone. Sometimes, though, we're kind of stubborn, aren't we? I have to admit this, and my wife is still mad at me about this to this day. I went and bought a gun safe. I was off work that day. All of my friends were working, and I got it to the house. It was heavy. It was 300 pounds. I got it in the door, and I wanted to take it downstairs. And Becky said, "Whoa." You're not doing that, not by yourself. Oh, but I can do it. And I did. I about tore the house down. It just about killed me. Becky said, I told you to wait for help. You don't have to do it by yourself. And we don't. We have to go through the trials of this world by ourselves. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So we see the sorrow of the child of God in verse 6. I'm going to read that again. Who passing through the valley of Baca make it a well. The rain also filleth the pools. And you're saying to yourself, where's he going with this? What's he talking about? In verse 6 there, it's no accident that those two verses, verse 4 and verse 5, came before that, talking about praises and talking about strength. And then we talk about sorrow in verse 6. And there's a reason for that. So those two verses, God always shows us a way. He preceded this talk a little bit about good things, and then he's talking about our sorrow. So let's study closely three major phrases in verse 6. The first phrase, number 1, is the valley of Baca. Have anybody remember reading that? I don't remember reading it, but I confessed a little bit this morning that when I'm reading my Bible through, I'm just reading, and that's not a good thing. I'm trying to get done, and that's not good. You don't absorb the Word of God when you just try to hurry through your 5 or 6 or 10 chapters a day, and that's not good. So I had never really seen this. I've read it. I know I have. But what is a valley? Is it not a low place? It's a low place, right? Valleys are deep places fixed between two mountains. Valleys are dark places. Valleys are discouraging places. And this is a personal note. I remember we used to live in Oregon, in Central Oregon. Delbert K know where Prineville is. And my mom and dad lived in Fossil, Oregon, which was 90 miles away. And we would visit them often on the weekends, and we'd travel over a certain road. Well, the regular, well-maintained road went up over the pass, and it was a windy road, kind of, but it was up high, and sometimes in the wintertime I didn't like driving it. But there was a shortcut, and it was called the Twickenham Valley. And we would drive through that if we were in a hurry, because we could save 15, 20 minutes. You know, when you're young, that really is important. But that valley was dark. It was shadowy. It was narrow. Sometimes the road wasn't that good. It was gravel, by the way. There were a lot of curves in it. You couldn't see the end of it. So you're going around all these curves. And those walls were high, and we looked up in them, and this is what we almost always did when we drove through that valley. We quoted from Psalms 23, the valley of the shadow of death. That's what we called that valley, okay? And we went through that valley several times, but Becky hated it. She would rather go over the top than through the mountain. So that valley took us to our final destination. Took us to Fossil, Oregon to see my folks. But we're not going to talk about a valley or a real valley today. We're going to talk about a spiritual valley. And that's what I really want you to see, is that spiritual valley. So the word Baca is a Hebrew word that means weeping or sorrow or tears. Anybody ever had any weeping time or sorrows or tears? Yeah, we all have. We have. It's not, this valley is not a geographical place. It's not located in the Holy Land. Rather, it's a generic word that describes any place of suffering or any place of sorrow. So any place you're at any time in your life where you're suffering or there's sorrow, there's families that have lost loved ones recently. They're in that valley of sorrow. So we see that's what we're talking about when we say the word Baca. It's a weeping or sorrow or tears. That's what it means. Truth. Number one, truth here. Brother Locke says, don't be discouraged by your difficulties. Yeah, there's difficulties in our life, and those valleys, you know, they're hard to get through sometimes. But he says, don't be discouraged. I know that's easy to say, not easy to do. But valleys are inescapable. You know, he says here, I don't mean to add to your sorrow, but There have been and will be more valleys of Baca, okay, for all of us. There have been times of sorrow and weeping in all of our lives for one reason or another. The end of the valley is usually only the beginning of another valley. You know, that I can see that. Sometimes you get to stay out of the valley for a while, but you know, it's inescapable. Due to our human frailties, we're going to be back in a valley sometime, okay? Valleys are inescapable. You know, and there's probably another one at the end. There's a preacher called Philip Brooks that said, in every pew there sits a person with a broken heart. What did Job say? Job, a man who had everything and lost it all. He said, man that is born of woman is of few days and full of trouble. That's in Job 14:1. So Job knew, you know, our life is few days and full of trouble. And I'm trying not to be, I'm not trying to discourage you this morning, because there really is an end to this. There's a lesson here to learn, especially about what we do in our valleys. But, you know, the valley of death, what I mentioned before, Psalm 23:4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it goes on. This is a spiritual analogy used to describe the death experience of a child of God. You know, I had always looked at it a little different than that, but there's other valleys that we go through. You know, we not only see that there's death, we go through death. I went through my mother and father dying. That was a deep valley. You know, it was hard to go through. So that's a valley. There's diseases and there's sickness. You know, there's people in our church right now that are hurting, who are under doctor's care, who have sicknesses and who have diseases. That is a valley for them. They're in that valley. There's also the valley of divorce. Did you know that 1,000 times a day in America, some judge's gavel falls, and with 2 words, divorce granted, somebody's love story comes to an end? There's a valley. That's a big valley. Okay? And then there's a valley of dismissal. There's a valley of losing your job, losing your livelihood. We've all been through or are going through or will be going through valleys in our life. Junior Hill warns about a theology out there. He calls it the gee whiz philosophy or theology. And it simply says, it goes, if you love God and trust Jesus and read your Bible and live in obedience, you'll always be a happy, prosperous and successful. You will be healthy, your wife will be beautiful, your children will be obedient, your house will be big, your car will be fast, your money will be secure. That's not true. As a Christian, that's not realistic. That's a lie. That philosophy and that theology is taught in many churches around the world. And it is not true. You know, look at the valleys that the apostles went through. They went through some big valleys. Yeah. So that is kind of an easy, simplistic theology that's not true. It doesn't happen. It's not the real world. Further, valleys are inexplicable. We don't understand why we're in those valleys sometimes. This is what makes our time in the valley so difficult and dark. We don't understand them. We can't explain them. And if we understand why we had to go through the valley, it would be easier to take. Because there's some good reasons why we go through valleys. We'll get to that. But if we could understand why we're in the valley, it would help us to go through the valley. You know, this is a great mystery of the things of God. The second point, the second wording in that verse that I want to talk about is who passing through. I'll read it again. Who passing through the valley of Baca, make it a well. So who's passing through? You know, some of us get stuck in the valley, in our valley. Some of us get stuck in it. And we have a tendency to set up camp there and stay a while. not the purpose of the valley. This verse says that we're supposed to be passing through. We're not supposed to set up camp there and stay in the valley. You get where I'm going here? There's a reason for this. You know, some of us, some people have a tendency to stay there and just kind of set up camp there for a while. You know, we kind of check things out, look around, you know, and we give the impression that we're going to be in that valley for a while. So we kind of, and I have to admit, I've been that way. I've kind of been comfortable in a valley. It's not right, but it's a fact. You know, I stayed in that valley too long is what happened. So another truth that Brother Locke brings out is don't be distracted from your destination. When we were traveling through the Twickenham Valley, the last place I wanted to stop was in that valley. I didn't like it. I didn't like driving through it. I wasn't distracted from the destination, which was going to see my parents. So we always kept going, but there's a time when we can be distracted when we're in our valley, okay? Don't forget where you are going. We're passing through. Brother Locke has a friend whose name is Herb Morphus, who always said this. He said, this low ground of sorrow, meaning the world, the life that we go through, this low ground of sorrow. But the point is, we are passing through it. The psalmist knew his destination. He knew where he was going. At that moment, it might have been a valley, but one day he would be walking out of that valley. David knew that. He knew what his final destination was. David went through a lot of valleys in his life, and he knew where he was going. Brother Locke says, I'm afraid that we have gotten our eyes off of our destination. When I was a boy, and these are my words, he used it because he's younger than me. He said when he was a boy 45 years ago, well, when I was a boy 55 years ago, the old saints of God used to sing, I am bound for the promised land. Amen. That's a destination. Or they would sing, when we all get to heaven. That's a destination. We sang about it. When the roll is called up yonder, we sang that. I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. There's another song, Won't It Be Wonderful There? We sang about the sweet by and by because we knew where our destination was. We're passing through to a city where sin and sickness and sorrow would no longer be. I wrote out to the side here, we still sing those songs, you know? But maybe when we sing those songs now, we can kind of look at our destination. Those songs are definitely talking about a destination. So we can remember that those are songs that tell us where we're going and why. Okay, we have a generation of people today who have pitched their tents in this world, and they think they are here for the duration. This is not the case. Listen, we're all just passing through this life. I have a friend, and if you guys, I remember because Sam has talked about him several times in messages. In Denver, when I was a little kid, this was a really, really old man. I think he's probably 50 or 60 or something like that. But, well, I was 14. I mean, he looked old. But his name was Cecil Smith. And when you ask him, how are you, Cecil? He would say, I'm just a pilgrim passing through. That was his outlook on life. I'm a pilgrim passing through. The things of this world will mean nothing in heaven. They will not mean anything. So, folks, we need to keep our minds on our destination, and I'll tell you why. If you know your destination, it will help you to be able to endure your tribulations. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Psalms 30, verse 5. These things have I spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. John 16, 33. So there's an answer. There's a solution to those valleys out there. And he has a little comment here. It says, you know, if you have correspondence for me, just forward it because I'm passing through. I'm not staying. Just forward that correspondence. Look at Job and what he said. When he lost everything, and he ended up sitting on the ash heap. And look at what he said. He said, you know, if you ask him, what do you think, Job? He would say, well, I don't like it much, but I'm just passing through. That's what he would have said. I'm not here for the duration. He said, for I know my Redeemer liveth. Though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. Job didn't lose sight of his destination. Okay? And Daniel, you know, what if we was to ask him about the lion's den? What would he would have said? And he would have said this before. He said this before. You know, he said, God is able. God is able to deliver me from the lions. So Daniel knew that his destination wasn't that lion's den. It was further out. The three Hebrew children as well, they said, our God is able to deliver us from this lion's den, or from the furnace, the fiery furnace. And look at what they heard at the tomb of Jesus the morning after he rose, when they went there, and the angel said, he's not here, he's risen. That final destination. So now we're getting to the meat of this. Number 3. It says in there, it says who passing through the valley of Baca make it a well. Okay? That's the term I want to talk about, and that's the meat of this sermon, is make a well. Allow me to give you some timely spiritual counsel when you find yourself passing through your valley. Here's what happens with far too many people. They find themselves in a temporary valley, and they give up their Sunday school class, they quit the choir, they drop out of church, but just until things are better. Well, is that right? Is that what we're supposed to do? No. Try that sometime with your job. So, you know, I'm going through a bad time right now, and I'll see you next month. That's not going to work. That's not going to work at all. You can't do that. You know, your boss is not going to say, oh, I'm sure. He's not going to say, God bless you, and we'll call the prayer chain. We love you. He's going to say, you know, I hired you for a job, and you can't be gone. So, you know, it won't work. Try it with your family. You know, I just don't feel like taking care of the baby. Maybe next month I'll feel like it. It's not an option, is it? We can't do that. We just can't opt out of that. It's not an option in our spiritual life either, to opt out of the service of the Lord. Here's the counsel. When I don't know what to do, then the best thing for me is to keep doing what I know to do. Isn't that true? I'm going to stay in church. I'm going to pray. I'm going to tithe. I'm going to stay connected with my Christian friends and brothers and sisters. That is the most important thing. After praying and tithing and being in church, we need to stay with our Christian friends until I get out of this valley. You know, that's what they're there for. Those friends are there to help through the valley. The next truth is, don't be delinquent in your duty. When the person in Psalms 84 found himself in a valley of sorrow, he did something unusual. He dug a well. Okay, why? You say, why are you talking about a well? What does that have to do with anything? While I'm here, he just might have said to himself, while I'm here, I might as well dig a well. You know, while I'm in that valley, while I'm going through that trouble, I might as well be productive. I might as well do something, okay? And you out here in southwest Kansas are no strangers to wells. There's wells everywhere. Those wells are there to benefit. They're there to water the crops. They're there for drinking water, okay? They're important to us. Well, can you imagine, water was a scarce and precious commodity to the pilgrims of the Bible. Wells were one of the ways to survive the dry and hot climate. Wells were dug by hand. Wells were hard work. Wells were the work of the patriarchs. And I'm going to ask a question. Have any of you been to see the largest hand-dug well in the world in Greensburg, Kansas? You guys have been there? How many? Raise your hand if you've been there. If you haven't, you need to go, because it gives you a new perspective on the wells that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob built. If you go down it, can you still go down in it? We were there when the kids were pretty young, and we went all the way to the water, all the way to the bottom. And if you look at the walls, the brick or rock or whatever it is, but there's dressed stone or rock all the way around that well, all the way up. I don't remember how deep it is. It's at least 50 foot deep, maybe more. But there's a lot of work went into digging that well, and a lot of work went into shoring up the side so it doesn't cave in. That Greensburg well it means more to me now than it ever did before. Abraham dug wells in Genesis 21:30. He said, and he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. He didn't just dig one well, he dug many. But then his son Isaac, he dug wells. In Genesis 26, in verse 15, it says, for all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with earth. All of that work. And I don't know how deep they had to go with water. It was certainly probably as deep as that Greensburg well. That's a lot of work. But in verse 16 there it says, and Abimelech said unto Isaac, go from us, for thou art much mightier than we. Abimelech was afraid of Isaac, and he was trying to run him off, so he shut up all the wells. Well, if you don't have a well, you don't water your animals, and he had lots of animals. So in verse 17, Isaac departed thence and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac digged again the wells of water which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham. And he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. And notice this last verse, verse 19. It says, and Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water. What is a well of springing water? Any of you ever seen one of those? Have you ever been to the San Luis Valley over around Monte Vista, Colorado? There's artesian wells everywhere. Back when I was a kid working on a harvest crew, you could go over there and take a 2-inch pipe and stick it down in the ground, and water would come up out of the ground. There were waters then. Of course, that valley is surrounded by high mountains and lots of snow, and that was unnaturally, of course, they used irrigation as well, but that water was springing. That water was coming up without the help of a pump. That caught my eye when I saw that well that Isaac dug in the valley, and it was springing water. And they digged another well and strove for that also, and he called his name, the name of it, Sitnah. And then Jacob dug a well. He probably dug more than one, but Jacob dug a well. And I think the point here is, well, I know the point here is, wells are not just for the present, they're for the future, they're for later. But a lot of these wells out here were drilled a long time ago. A lot of those wells in the Holy Land were drilled a long time ago. Some of them were no immediate benefit. In other words, they had to wait for the rains to fill them. But the rain also fills the pools. So dig a well the first time through your valley. So you get where I'm going here? You're going through a valley, dig a well in that valley. It's a benefit to not only you, but it's a benefit to others that come through that valley after you. Maybe your children, maybe your grandkids. You dig that well in that valley, and the next time through, it'll benefit others. Jacob dug a well that survived hundreds of years and then refreshed Jesus in John 4. Jesus drank from the very well that Jacob dug and built, and it refreshed him. So, you know, Jacob probably got the benefit from that well, but Jesus got the benefit as well, hundreds of years later. Isn't that awesome? David longed for the water of the well of Bethlehem. Remember that story? Bethlehem was not a friendly territory for David at that time. He couldn't just walk into Bethlehem and get some water out of that well, but he did anyway. He went in there, probably against all the advice of his generals, and he went in there and got, was it him that went and got it, or one of his mighty men of valor that got that water for him? He longed for that water. Many are the valleys, and I'm almost through. Didn't think I'd ever have to say that. But many are the valleys of the people of God. Few are the wells, though. So all of us go through valleys, but do all those dig wells in those valleys? Let's try to dig wells. Don't waste our sorrows. Dig out a blessing in the place of barrenness. Now you're seeing where I'm going with this. Leave a well for others. If you go through something, I know I went through the death of my mother and father, and it was really hard, and it helped me to understand when other people were going through the same thing, and I could say, I know about the grieving process, and I know it takes a long time, and I know that God is right there with you when you go through that, okay? So, leave the well for others. After all, aren't we drinking from the wells of the saints of God, that the saints of God have dug before us? Paul dug some wells. He had some valleys. When he was in prison, the prison epistles, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, Paul dug wells in those valleys. And he wrote books for us. That's an awesome thing. 2 Corinthians 1:4-6 says, who comforteth us in our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble, by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. That's the well. When you dig a well, you're able to comfort the others that go through that. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also aboundeth by Christ. And whether we be afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effectual in the enduring of the same suffering, which we also suffer. Or whether we be comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. Now lastly, I want to talk about another person that dug some wells. How many of you, just raise your hand if you know who John Bunyan is. Raise your hand, have any of you read any of his books? There's some little interesting notes about him. He was born in 1628, and he died in 1688. He was arrested at age 32 for conducting religious meetings without permission of the state church. He's in England. He was in England. He was English. And they wouldn't let him preach. They put him in jail. And I'll digress just a little bit for just a second. I think one of the main reasons why we have the United States of America is for religious freedom. Not freedom from religion, freedom of religion. John Bunyan was arrested and put in jail for 12 years. He stayed in jail, but there he dug some wells. Okay? There in that Bedford jail, he wrote 9 books, including Pilgrim's Progress. And that is a hard book to slog through. It's hard to understand, but it's one of my memories of my dad. He used to be our training union teacher. We used to have an hour of class on Sunday night, too, before church. And one quarter, he read that whole book to our class and explained it to us. And it's an awesome book. And I'll never forget that. By the end of John Bunyan's life, he had published 60 books before he died at age 60. So he dug some wells in that prison. This morning, I want us to remember what is important is not what you go through, but what you leave behind. When what have you left behind? And I had to search my soul and find out what have I left behind. And I want to leave something good. I want to leave something for my family. I want to leave something for my church. I want to leave some things behind that will help others see Jesus. Now we're going to do things just a little bit different. I got a song I want you to listen to, and it's called Leave a Well in the Valley. And we're going to play that song, and then we're going to be dismissed. And if you have any need to talk to me or Brother Delbert, feel free. But we're going to try this. You want to go ahead and play it, Terry? Gordon Jensen recorded this song, and it's about this verse that we're talking about.
To the valley you've been through, those around you must go to. the rocky path you've traveled, they will go. If to those learning of your tribe you'll lend the secret of your smile, you will help them more than you will ever know. Blessed is the man who has learned to understand, to become a hand for God to those in need. Yes, that all the tears you shed with God's help become instead precious song that will heal hearts that bleed.
That is a good song. I told Becky about this verse, and I told her that Brother Locke put the song on here, and she went on YouTube and found it. And there was 4 or 5 different artists that sing it. And I like this one, but I know it's hard to understand some of the words, especially for those of us who can't hear very well. But one of the things he said is when you leave a well in the valley for others, that others come along. And that's what I wanted, my message this morning is that we need to leave a well in our valleys.